Benvenuti a tutti a questo nuovo caffè con JSBach.it, il primo che viene trasmesso all'interno del Convegno internazionale Bach e l'Italia. Parla dalla Gran Bretagna, dall'Università di Cardiff, professore Kenneth Hamilton. So welcome to Professor Kenneth Hamilton. Thank you so much for being here. We are really happy to welcome you for this first coffee with JSBach.it during the international conference Bach and Italy. Thank you so much. Just to present Professor Hamilton, Kenneth Hamilton performs worldwide as a recitalist, concerto soloist, and broadcaster. He has appeared frequently on radio and television in Britain, the US, Germany, France, Singapore, Canada, Australia, Turkey, China, and Russia, including a performance of Chopin's first piano concerto with the Istanbul Chamber Orchestra on Turkish television, and a dual role as pianist and presenter for the television program Mendelssohn in Scotland, broadcast in Europe and in the US by Deutsche Welle channel. He is familiar artist on BBC Radio 3, Radio 4, and the World Service, and has numerous international festival engagements to his credit. Kenneth Hamilton is head of the School of Music at Cardiff University and is a well-known expert on the history of piano performance. He was himself a student of Lawrence Glover and Ronald Stevenson. He is especially fascinated by the varied performance styles on the pianistic golden age from Liszt to Paderewski, which he doesn't seek to imitate directly, but admires as imaginative sources of inspiration for present-day playing. His last book, After the Golden Age, Romantic Pianism and Modern Performance, Oxford University Press, was a classical music bestseller, and his recordings have been greeted with critical acclaim, including the album called Back to Bach. So welcome again, Professor Hamilton, and I'm really happy you're here. And we used to begin this podcast with a traditional question. And we also would like to ask you again, also if it's maybe a more formal situation during the conference. And would you like to share with us a special memory of yours which is linked to Bach and his music?
Yes, I suppose my first memory of Bach actually as a child learning the piano was that I didn't understand Bach at all. I did not understand Bach's music. Of course, certainly in Britain, it's probably the same in Italy, and I know it is the same in Germany. When children are learning the piano, one of the first things they are given the easier preludes and fugues by Bach, or the easier two-part or three-part inventions. And I basically didn't understand the musical style because I couldn't actually find the tune in a lot of Bach's music. I suppose as a child, I wasn't used to hearing Baroque music. I was used to hearing the sort of music that everybody hear every day, which basically had some sort of romantic style melody. And so when I was presented with something like the first prelude, the C major it seemed pleasant enough, but I was constantly waiting for the tune to come in. It seemed like an accompaniment without a melody, and I just didn't understand. So I remember turning over the page, expecting to be a tune, but instead I just kept going. And of course, now I realize that my attitude was a typical romantic one. It was basically an attitude from the 1850s or 60s, so which is why, of course, Gounod writes the Ave Maria.
Without the melody, without the Ave Maria.
Yes. So basically I was expecting, so basically I just didn't understand that. And I suspect, I don't remember now, I expect I just played this very mechanical, like a Czerny study.
Yeah.
So I expected I did that. And in fact, it took me years to work out what a piece like that was supposed to be doing. And I found Handel with the sort of oratorio choruses and things like that, which of course were very, very, very popular, very popular in Britain still, as much more approachable. So it took me a long time to understand how Bach worked. And I think part of the problem also was that we played Bach on the wrong instruments. I mean, as you know, none of these pieces, or hardly any of these pieces, were written for the piano. They were written for the clavichord or the harpsichord. And of course, the very first time, years later, I came across a clavichord. I realized how something like this made a lot of sense in a clavichord. It seemed intimate and sort of improvisatory and strong. But of course, on a concert grand piano, we're in a completely different
atmosphere. That's a totally completely different instrument, and we will talk about it, I hope, later.
Yes. So basically, my first memories of Bach are incomprehension. And I think it was only later on when I heard a recording of the B minor Mass, which I don't think I still fully understood, but was very impressed, especially by the Sanctus, which I thought was really fantastic. It was fantastic that the music began to actually speak to me in this sort of way. So in a way, the vocal music spoke initially much more than the
piano, the keyboard.
And even now, I shouldn't confess this, I feel more comfortable, I think, with Bach Busoni and Bach Liszt, with the sound world on the piano than I do with the original Bach. I feel that with original Bach, one is trying to force the music to suit the instrument, a modern instrument, whereas the transcriptions are effectively already written for this instrument.
Yeah, indeed. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is that as a performer, you are used to perform both Bach's original keyboard works and their transcription. But do you think that there should be a different approach toward these two types of work? And also, moreover, that we know that, for example, Liszt piano was also different from the modern one, from the modern piano. So what do you deal with these kind of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think even playing the original works of Bach on a modern piano is a type of transcription. The instrument reacts so differently to any instrument that Bach would have known. So inevitably you adapt it, and also even the way you sit, because the keyboard is so small. And I've tried to adopt various different approaches to try to, I'm not saying imitate the harpsichord or clavichord, but try to get the slightly more intimate feel of certainly of clavichord. And when I have played original Bach, especially in a program of other pieces of music, I've often played all of it una corda, for example. I know some people will hate it, just so that the sound world is suddenly completely different. So if I maybe the French Suite in G. Which I put the una corda on there so that I don't get the brighter. But of course, I know that that's written for a harpsichord, which, relatively speaking, in Baroque at the time was a bright instrument. And I also, you've probably noticed there, the way I think of music naturally brings out voices that are not there. You couldn't do in a harpsichord. So I'm aware that when I do this.
Both voices are you cannot
so I just sort of begin to do that, but then somehow stopping yourself from doing that seems unnatural as well. So what gives me personally more freedom is just to think, okay, this is a sort of transcription, even if it's actually the original
Yeah,
score.
I personally I can completely understand, because I maybe you don't know, but I graduated in piano in Italy, and then I switched to harpsichord just because I was more interested in Baroque music and in Baroque repertoire, and so I said, okay, just let's play it on the true instrument and on not on the piano, because that's, it feels strange. It feels something different.
Yeah, I think it is different. Yeah.
Yeah, and so indeed you are you mostly focused on Bach's transcriptions, so on the 19th century transcription from Bach's works. For example, and both as a pianist and also obviously as a musicologist. And your first important musicological publication focused on Liszt and on his music. Liszt is certainly one of your authors. In your opinion, how did the Liszt personality impact on the later reception of Bach?
Mm-hmm. I mean, Liszt was one of the first people to make, if you like, concert transcriptions of Bach, genuine of the organ works. You know, I think it's quite. I think for Liszt, Bach was a sort of musical image as much as music. I think for anybody working in the German European sphere of the time, because Bach quite early on, as you know, became a sort of emblem of German musician, emblem of great German art and great German creativity. So I think and also of seriousness, of seriousness in music. And so for Liszt, playing Bach or writing Bach transcriptions, performing Bach, was an element an attempt to move away his musical persona, his own musical personality in the eyes of the public, towards a more serious direction. It was the same as playing the Beethoven and Bach, the sort of two Bs at that time. So for Liszt, there was a personal reason to play a little bit of Bach in public, but he actually played hardly any Bach in public, apart from very occasionally the organ transcriptions. If you look at the catalogue of Liszt's performance, most of the Bach was actually performed in private circles and so on. So he played the chromatic fantasy and fugue. Apparently, we don't have any detail about it, but basically in private circles, because it wasn't regarded as public music. And I think this is something we forget about a lot of composers now, that a lot of our standard public repertoire was never public music. The Beethoven piano sonatas were never intended as public performance music. Neither were the Mozart sonata. I mean, these were all, either private music or just for a very small circle. So we take these things out and we put them in a modern day concert, and then we're surprised that they don't exactly engage the public in sort of way. But with Liszt, I mean, when Liszt became Kapellmeister in Weimar in the late 1840s, 1850s, I think then the engagement with Bach became important, because Liszt, of course, had partly a German background. I mean, he regarded himself fundamentally as Hungarian, but his mother was Viennese, was a Viennese chambermaid. His first language was German, obviously, as you know, even though he became quickly more comfortable in French after he moved with Paris. But very amusingly, that when he went to Weimar initially, the bits of German he remembered were basically, as the court ladies said, this low-class Viennese dialect, this Viennese peasant dialect, which you would understand, because I mean that was his mother. That must the German that he effectively learned from his mother. So he took actually several years to begin to sound like a German-speaking Hochdeutsch. But I don't think he was always more comfortable, I think, in French by that time. But I think the idea that he was then in Weimar following on in the line of German composers. So there was Beethoven, and there was Bach, and the Bach becomes quite important in the big fantasy and fugue he writes for organ, for the consecration of the organ in Merseburg Cathedral in Germany, and of course on the BACH theme. But what is amusing about this piece, as well as sort of fascinating, I think, is that it opens with quite deliberate gesture towards Germany, towards Bach and Hungary. In other words, he's super, and I don't think, I mean, I noticed this when I was learning this piece for a recording a few years ago for the Back to Bach CD that you mentioned, that in fact the upper voice is the Hungarian scale. So basically the Bach, the right hand is Hungarian and the left hand is German.
Yeah, what a kind of perception really of mixing of,
Indeed. So you get this big sort of cathedral sound. That going up, so above it. And of course it also sounds like the Rheingold as well to us there.
Yeah, it's true.
So we have all sorts of little musical connections. I don't think Liszt was thinking of that, but he certainly was thinking of the left hand Bach, the right hand Liszt. And that, so in a way that is an attempt to demonstrate some sort of musical ancestry, but it's one that would only be noticed by people who would associate the right hand with the Hungarian scale. But I think it tells you immediately, the first bars of the piece, is what Liszt thinks he is doing.
Yeah, that and that's I would like also to talk a little bit more on how the impact on which was the impact in Liszt's music of his own culture. So the Catholic culture, he appeared in Vienna, and then his familiarity with the German Protestant culture, and mostly by receiving the Bach's sacred works, because we know that Liszt was a Catholic musician, but the question is, when playing Liszt works inspired by Bach's sacred output, is the religion dimension evident for you? And or does Liszt treat Bach's material in a purely musical fashion? So how this cultural gap also, not just on the language aspect, but also on the cultural point of view, and how it...
I don't actually think there is a particular cultural gap, because I think Liszt associated Bach's religious works, or indeed just Bach's works period, with Christianity.
Yeah, that's true.
With sort of, God and, Christ and this sort of thing. And of course, Liszt is aware that this is the Protestant tradition. But he even with the big version of the variations on Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen, he ends with the chorale, with the Protestant chorale. So in other words, he adopts the entire sort of Protestant communal effect of that. And I haven't actually noticed in Liszt's writings or in his letters any sense of alienation from Bach as such. On the contrary, he admires Bach's chromatic harmony, and of course both Liszt and Wagner are fascinated by this, and Wagner's Meistersinger is to some extent a tribute to Bach as the sort of great German Baroque composer. And Liszt said at one point that eventually one gets tired of the big dramatic effects of Handel, that one admires Handel, but and that goes to the sort of more detailed, intimate chromaticism of Bach. So of course, Liszt's own musical language is very highly chromatic. What I find quite interesting is that when Liszt's son dies, when Daniel Liszt dies in his late teens, very unexpectedly at a very young age, and dies in Berlin, what Liszt writes at that point is effectively a meditation on Bach, on Weinen, Klagen, on the descending, the Baroque descending mourning bass line that you know.
Yeah, with the chromatic scale.
Indeed, and it's quite a remarkable piece. Of course, that eventually becomes the big piece. Years later, he revised it to become this big piece, ending with the chorale with sort of, you know, acceptance of God, if you like. The words "was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan," whatever God does is done for the best. So it's an attempt to make sense of this. Of the death of children, because by the time he writes the bigger version of the piece on this, his daughter Blondine has also died. So there's two deaths of 2 out of his 3 children, sort of very young. One of tuberculosis, the other in childbirth. So even for somebody as religious as Liszt, it's difficult to accept why this
something. Yeah.
Like, so he's going through their own version of the book of Job in the Old Testament, this sort of inexplicable. Now, in my view, the book of Job in the Old Testament is a terrible book. I mean, it has no explanation at all. It's just it just throws up its hands and says, just don't ask this question. Liszt actually takes the answer from that Bach cantata, from the Wein und Klagen cantata, and it's not necessarily a Protestant or a Catholic answer. It's just a sort of Christian answer, also unexplained. Whatever God does is for the better. In other words, it's just a declaration of faith rather than anything else. But the interesting thing is, I think that he not only accepts this without any contradiction between Catholicism and Protestant, but also that he writes into the second piece, he writes in a sort of second large climax and collapse, which I think, although Liszt never talked about it, was the death of the daughter. So the shorter version of the piece, it basically has one sort of, you know, crisis point, which I suspect reflects Daniel's death, and then the second crisis point in the bigger piece, which then results in this sort of, if you like, the philosophical answer, the Protestant stroke Christian answer, "Was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan." But the really interesting thing is that one can imagine him, I think, in the earlier piece, which starts with more or less a transcription of the opening bars of the Bach cantata, of the Wein und Klagen, with the descending, and then just turns into sort of Liszt's own meditation on this, and it's actually done quite, I think, very sophisticated fashion, because unless you're listening closely, you can't really initially tell where Bach is ending and where Liszt, if I carried on. So this is all Bach. It's becoming slightly freer here. But now here it's really Liszt. And now it's Liszt's own variation.
Yeah.
And from there, it's effectively Liszt's own improvisation, if you like, on the theme. So one can sort of effectively identify the moment, and I suppose one is imagining this, where he sits down and plays this riff from the score of Wein und Klagen. It was obviously, and then just begins gradually to improvise. And the point where he begins to improvise is where the chorus becomes homophonic, or more or less homophonic, for a short time, sort of, a note, sort of the Angstund note, they think Angstund. So at the point where the 4-part texture breaks down, is where it's, in terms of contrapuntal texture, it's a point where Liszt begins to sort of start improvising, because he realizes at that point that all you're going to have on the piano is 4-part chords. So you're going to miss the effect of the choir. That so that it's quite a remarkable intimate piece in that sort of way. And in the bigger version, the bigger worked out version, that moment is not quite so obvious, because it's more of a series of variations on that initial theme. So I think to some extent with all that, we're going from the private reception of Bach in the earlier piece, but
and then the public one,
and a more public one, but still based on a sort of very shattering private moment, or two very shattering private moments, and Bach becomes the conduit for that.
And then we maintained with the discourse with Liszt, but I would like to come in Italy. And so Liszt, we know that stays in Italy and contributed to this dissemination of Bach's keyboard works in Italy, mostly in Rome. And in your opinion, how much does Busoni owe to Liszt and to his view of Bach? So Italian-German pianist of Busoni, and his relation with Liszt.
I think he lost an awful lot to Liszt, because Busoni, of course, was a huge Liszt fan. I'm a massive Liszt fan. But I think in terms of Busoni's keyboard setting of Bach, he actually owes it to Liszt's reception of Handel, not to Bach. Because the one piece of Liszt, and of course Busoni knew virtually everything Liszt had written in every version. Busoni was a collector of Liszt scores, and also the one piece that seems to prefigure Bach Busoni is actually not the Liszt keyboard Bach transcriptions, but it's the saraband and chaconne from Handel's Almira, which is effectively Bach Busoni. I mean, it's the Bach Busoni style. So this sort of very organ-like texture, mostly in the lower register of the piano, sort of full chord. It's really the sort of Bach with
that's really this huge organ.
That's right. The sound world. So the sound world of the Almira saraband and chaconne effectively turns into Bach Busoni. I'm not saying, of course, that Busoni is quite capable of conceiving these things himself, and also the way people tended to play Bach in the late 19th century would be to fill out chords and octaves and various things like that, so you naturally get. But I remember being struck when I did first hear play the Liszt Handel transcription, just how Bach Busonian that actually seemed in terms of sound world. So I suspect that that's really, if there is one direct Busoni inspiration, that is probably from that Handel piece.
But mostly from Handel than from Bach.
Yes. So
that's
Handel
interesting.
Bach.
That's interesting. I will think about. Thank you for this.
It's okay.
And then we leave Busoni and Liszt, and we switch to Chopin, which is another author you are used to play. And indeed, one of your recent recordings is titled More Preludes to Chopin. And it is well known that Chopin's preludes, among others, are in depth to Bach's works. And in your opinion, did the romantic reception of Bach still possess some elements of authenticity of our tradition going back to Bach himself and to his family, or not?
Yes, I think it possessed authenticity because some of the performance world was still the same. So in a way, they were still doing this. Some of the pieces still had their own function. The preludes to Chopin, for example, the Chopin prelude is pretty obvious that the first Chopin it's pretty obvious that this is a version
that's
of,
pretty different.
Yeah. And if you slow down the Chopin prelude, it's even more. Because
also on the rhythmic point of view,
that's right. You begin to hear, and likewise, the first etude is another version of that.
The biggest version, on the big keyboard, and on the small one, the small harpsichord.
Exactly. So with the prelude, because there is still the tradition of preluding, of preluding before pieces and at the beginning of concerts and things like that. So the Chopin is fitting in with this tradition, and I suspect that even though that we are very much in a sort of romantic sound world for Chopin, the incomprehension that I had as a child of what is this prelude, I didn't even know what a prelude was, why does it have no tune, whatever, is not something that would have ever struck Chopin or anybody's generation, because they knew what a prelude was, and it didn't have to have a tune. It was quite literally a preludial piece. So Chopin is fitting in there. I think also Chopin's own natural musical style is extremely contrapuntal. I mean, he rarely writes specific fugues. I think there's one unpublished fugue in A minor, but there's so many sections of Chopin's music that is multi-voiced, with voices going in even, the sort of natural way where there's two voices or three or four going on at the same time, and retaining their independence to some extent, which is very different from the natural musical language of a lot of other composers at the time. When Schumann writes fugues, he writes fugues, but a lot of certainly his earlier piano music is not multi-voiced, and in that sort of way it's more homophonic. So Chopin's own, I think, natural musical inclinations are closer to Bach's style. In other words, he thinks contrapuntally. Even in nocturne style. I mean, I'm separating the voices there to try to
to switch, and to identify the different.
Indeed. But so Chopin seems naturally there's a tripartite texture going on there, which, and I don't know any other nocturnes from that era or lyrical pieces like that so naturally seem to suddenly open out into contrapuntal texture. So and of course Chopin, well, he would always famously say to his students, practice Bach for me, play Bach for me. Would use Bach not just as teaching material, but also, as I said, I think as an attempt to clear the mind, that the lines, because I think what Chopin probably, and I'm putting words into Chopin's mouth, admired was the integrity of the individual lines in Bach, apart from anything else. The chromatic harmony is one, but again, if we take Schumann as another example, the individual voices in Schumann often go all over the place, and they seem to, especially in earlier Schumann, the Schumann I think of as the better Schumann. It was just that it's
the less artificial, celebrating, So for Schumann, the counterpoint counts as something cultivated.
Yes,
while for
indeed.
Chopin it's something more natural. We can more familiar.
Indeed, he's just a natural. I mean, it's the same true with Liszt and Wagner. Actually, that I don't. Liszt is not naturally contrapuntal composer, but Wagner is in a way. You just have to look at the scores of Tristan or Meistersinger or Götterdämmerung to see that voices with their own integrity going in and out all the time, whereas Liszt actually sort of really only tends to do that when he's writing fugues, and even then the fugues are rarely more than three independent voices. He then tends to double. It's just a different way of thinking about music, I think.
I guess that the only one who really maybe has this idea of contrapunting is Brahms, but that's really has this kind of education which that's really totally familiar to write fugues and to with that kind of
yes, I think that's true. And I think when Bach does it sometimes, when Brahms does it sometimes, you lose some of the lyrical element with Brahms sometimes, but with Chopin, amazingly, you retain the lyrical element.
That's true. He's really able to combine the romantic melodic aspects, and then that's true. And let's go to talking about your education, your own education. And you studied with Ronald Stevenson, a pianist and a composer who wrote some interesting transcriptions and elaborations after Bach's originals. And did you study Bach's original keyboard works with Stevenson, or did Stevenson's view of Bach change when studying and performing Bach's original work and his own transcriptions and Stevenson's transcriptions?
That's an interesting question. Ron, I didn't study original Bach with Ronald Stevenson, but I studied a lot of Bach Busoni, and of course Stevenson was a massive Busoni fan and a sort of Busoni scholar. Loved Busoni, and I think Ronald's concept of Bach was very much a Bach-Busoni concept. I mean, he knew about early keyboards, he knew about the historical performance, because when I studied with Ronald, that was the 1990s by that time. But I think that the sound world he thought of was actually still a sort of Bach-Busoni sound world. And Ronald wrote Purcell transcriptions that are very much an attempt to produce a repertoire of Purcell. That is a bit like Bach Busoni with sort of and you can hear basically sort of highly chordal, but also quite a lot of spread chords in a way that sounds as if it ought to be historical performance, but sort of isn't quite in a way. But the sound world is an extremely romantic sound world, in this sort of also with the added inner voice. And one thing I do remember with Ronald, he always liked emphasizing. He'd want you to emphasize the slight dissonances, so they weren't designed to be just forgotten about past, but really sort of. You would always get it.
Yeah.
And something I can tell you, Maria, one of the things was that in Ronald Stevenson's piano studio, his composition studio, he had Busoni's piano bench. It was actually Busoni's piano, a long piano bench, because Busoni, as you probably know, liked to move up and down the keyboard, and also sort of a large photograph of Busoni.
Yeah,
So when you were playing the
yeah, you can
you could see Busoni. you could see Busoni. So there was this idea of a sort of musical tradition going on.
Just to feel free and to feel at ease. One of the last questions now is that's really I'm really interested in. You're a great performer. We can hear you during this coffee, but also a distinguished professor. And the question is connected with our first, your first answer. So your experience as a child playing Bach's Prelude. And in Italy, Bach's works are represent a solid ground in a pianist's educational path, and for a long time, they have been conceived as an essential prerequisite for the performance of the romantic, post-romantic, and contemporary modern repertoire. How is the situation in the UK? So how is Bach conceived for a pianist?
I think it's the same in the UK. It's regarded as an essential foundation. I think it's given far too early. I think piano students start with Bach far too early. In other words, they start with Bach as a sort of, well, I think the expression you used is very good, as a foundation. In other words, they would say, well, if you can play that sort of texture, or
really a technical exercise.
Yes, then you can go on to so you expand it, but in fact, I think Bach is actually more difficult to understand than that. Also, the fugues are given, I think, far too early before people can actually make music of the fugues. Again, they're treated. They're treated like, but not display pieces of their own. Where they're treated as means of developing the technique for distinguishing voices. I think also that they encourage a too confined attitude to the piano, just because they're written for a much narrower keyboard. So plus their usage of pedal in Bach is really problematic, and I think most of the time it's probably best to use no pedal at all, or relatively little pedal in original Bach. But again, so therefore Bach can't teach you about manipulation of the pedal for piano music really from 1830s onwards. So I think that the prestige of Bach means that he has started too early, that just because the notes look to some extent relatively simple and they're small confined, and because children, the span of the hands is not so wide.
So that's right. Easy, so apparently easier.
Apparently easy. So like everybody else, I was given, as I said to you, 2 and 3 part inventions, and the easier preludes and fugues to start with and stuff like that. But I don't think I understood them. I was playing the notes, but I honestly, to be honest, I don't think they had any much meaning for me as character pieces until later, where I began to understand where the musical value actually was. And I suspect that actually Bach is in a way more difficult than people think in that respect.
That's true.
And it's probably not a good idea. There was also always this sequence that you started off with Bach preludes and fugues, and then you went on to Beethoven piano sonatas, and then you went on to Chopin and Liszt, and then there was something modern. And the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, their piano exams, which most people, not everybody, most people in Britain do, also had that sort of sequence. Now they don't have it so much now, they've opened up, but for most of the 20th century, when the Associated Board was actually going on, that was what you actually did. So there was basically a sequence of music that didn't necessarily speak directly to the children, or in some respects was, in a way, was easier technically, but intellectually more sophisticated. And when you add in the fact that virtually none of this music was written for the modern piano, or written for
that's
piano
true.
at all.
And a child cannot understand this.
No, and in fact, most of the teachers,
most of them, yeah.
Yes,
most
of the teachers had no idea. I mean, I remember sort of, a lot of teachers that really probably never played a harp. I'd certainly never seen a clavichord. I mean, they would have maybe seen a description of a clavichord in a book. So there was a real incomprehension in this sort of way. So it's a dangerous. Dangerous is too. Of course, it's not dangerous in the sense of a bridge collapsing or something like that. But
but it's on a musical side, that's but for example, in Italy, it also had some big, deep consequences on the reception of Bach through among professionals, performers. For example, during the 20th century, it was not so used to be played in concert. The original Bach, the transcription is something different, but the original Bach was not so performed. Why, the pianists were more used to play the romantic and post-romantic repertoire, or when playing Bach, the more, for example, the chromatic fantasy and fugue, or this more these works which apparently are more technically more difficult on the technical point of view, more spectacular, we can say.
Yes, and of course, virtually.
And it really influenced a lot these receptions. So Bach was for education, mostly for education or for self training. So for private situations and not for the public.
Yes, and of course, virtually none of Bach's solo piano music or solo keyboard music, because it wasn't piano music, was written for public performance, just like, as we said earlier, the Beethoven sonatas. So there was this whole early repertoire, if you like, which is then used as public music for children and teenagers. And frankly, it's really boring. I mean, if most people playing Bach fugues at the age of 12 or something like that, it basically doesn't sound very interesting.
Purely Bach. But it's also boring for children, because
it just so it doesn't do Bach any favors, and it doesn't do the audience any favors either.
And just to come back to this occasion, which is the International Conference Bach and Italy, and we are really glad to begin this conference with this talk with you, and thank you once again. And as you know, one of the most purposes of our association, JSBach.it, and of this conference is the improvement of a dialogue between musicologists and performers. And for a long time, it has been missing in Italy, and this deeply influenced the reception of Bach's music. And Professor Hamilton, you show how it's possible to make a dialogue between musicology and performers. You have already done during this talk, but because you are both performer and scholar. And do you think that a continuing dialogue between musicology and performance could give something more to music and also to our comprehension of music?
Well, I mean, I think it has to happen, because it's not just in Italy, but in recent years, and I think to some extent in the Anglo sphere and in the American and British culture, there has been a bit more common ground between musicologists and performers, but there's still a lot of suspicion. I mean, I sort of wrote once that it was basically the musicologists regard the performers as ignorant and stupid, basically, because they don't, and the performers regard the musicologists as unmusical and practically inept and hopeless. And
that's true.
And so there's just a completely different worldview. But I think a little more humility, a sort of a humble attitude, slightly more humble attitude on both sides help, because there is an awful lot that musicologists can learn from performers. Some musicologists do write idiotic things. I mean, you only have to look at the finger.
That's true, because there are a lot of musicologists who never played a note on any instrument. That's Yes,
Exactly.
that's also for me personally, it's really hard to imagine how to talk about music, to write about music
Yes.
without playing, without having an idea of how to play, although not professionally, but how to play.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean,
on
so
the other side, pianists who just make scales and arpeggios and
yes.
virtuosism without thinking about nothing else, then
I remember a few years ago, I was asked by a publisher to review for publication, for possible publication, a book on basically on piano master classes that certain very famous teachers had given in a country that will remain nameless, and I basically said, you know, this book is unpublishable because it was full of performance teachers saying this is what Liszt wanted and this is what Chopin wanted, and with no historical. I mean, most of it was just wrong, you know. Most of it was just this is what I think Liszt wanted or whatever. And I said this book cannot be published because, but basically, it's the worst aspect of performers thinking they know what they're not just saying this is what this sounds like to me, they're saying this is what the composer wanted, and it's a very dangerous thing. And I think there's a second delusion that's going on here, which is somehow we are transmitting the composer. Well, we're transmitting a bit of the composer, but mostly we are transmitting ourselves, you know.
Also because Bach is that, and Beethoven's too, and also Liszt,
and
and
we are
also
still alive.
Busoni. They are all.
I mean, if we went outside this concert here and we asked one of the music students outside, you know, why they became musicians, 90% of the time they will say because I wanted to express myself through music. They won't say because I wanted to express Beethoven through music.
Through music.
Through music. It's always, you know, and so performers are kidding themselves that somehow we are trying to sort of, you know, be in touch with the spirits of the dead. We are partly we are like actors. We're channeling certain things of composer, but just like you, if somebody is performing Shakespeare's Macbeth, you don't say, you know, this actor has just got Macbeth itself. He's got the final archetype to Macbeth. You say this is Laurence Olivier playing Macbeth. Just like, you know, whatever. Even if I try to be as Bach-like as possible, whatever my image is, ultimately I'm expressing myself.
Also because you are living in the 21st century
times.
and not in Leipzig in the 18th century, being
indeed
surrounded by child.
Indeed, I know, and I still have my own hair and no wig, you know, sort of thing. So basically, I think we both have to understand a bit more what we're doing. We should stop being delusional that we are somehow channeling the spirit of Bach. We are maybe to a little extent, but we're also channeling and the musicologists also need to actually work out what musicology is for. I find it very difficult to conceive of musicology when it is not actually to help the understanding or enjoyment of music for the public. I don't see the point of scholarship for its own sake, and unless it's actually helping us to enjoy or illuminate in some way these works of the past. So I think we both have to bear in mind, you know, what we're doing is for. I mean, what our audience is, and in other words, what is the musicologist audience, and what is our audience? And if the musicologist audience is just 3 other musicologists, then why does something have to be published? Why not just send it to the 3 people you know will be interested? Likewise, as a performer, I want to reach an audience. You know, otherwise I can sit at home and play the piano, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, that's true. And really, in the UK, in the US, you have already done a lot. In Italy, we are starting to.
Well, we've done a little, Maria, but not as much as it could be. But a little, we've done a little.
Yeah, but first step by step, and we hope that this situation will change in next years, decades, and so on. So thank you once again, Professor Hamilton, for your illuminating words, for this interesting talk. And I know that you have already visited Italy, and you went to Turin last year, giving a couple of recitals during the festival, back to back here. But I really hope we can meet I can meet you soon, very, very soon again. And maybe as a guest of our association, JSBach.it, we also really hope. So, and so thank you again. And for now, we would like to wish to greet our listener with music. While Professor Hamilton will perform for us the prelude from Weinen, Klangen, Sorgen und Sagen from Bach's cantatas BWV 12, as transcribed for piano by Franz Liszt. Dunque, salutiamo anche in italiano, vi ringrazio per aver seguito questo nuovo caffè con JSBach.it e vi ricordo che tutte le puntate sono disponibili sul nostro sito JSBach.it e che ovviamente siete invitati a seguire gli altri eventi della conferenza che seguiranno da oggi, lunedì 23 novembre 2020, sino a sabato mattina. Vi ringrazio e grazie ancora al professor Hamilton. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.